folks. This is Screen Watching. My name's Dan Barrett. I'm joined by Simon Foster. Before we kickstart this week's program, I thought it's probably important to take a bit of a spiritual cue for the week from a little TV show called The Simpsons.
So we'll march day and night by the big cooling tower. They have the plant, but we have the power.
Beautifully said, Dan Barrett, and beautifully said, The Simpsons. We stand here in solidarity with the WGA strikers who are still out as we record this.
Oh, no, Simon, it's got nothing to do with the WGA. This was in reference to the Electric Mayhem.
This is not like TV, only better.
Television! Teacher, mother!
Secret lover.
What, that's it? That's your movie?
Well, I said that I had an idea for a movie.
Dudes, dudettes, and other identified people, this is Screen Watching. My name is Dan Barrett. I'm joined, as always, by the handsome man from just north of Sydney. It's Simon Foster.
Good to be here, Dan Barrett. Hello, Screen Watchers. As we record this, it's a very late evening. It's 8:30 here on a Friday night. I actually put white eye drops, like listening the red of my eyes, so I looked awake because I'm living in a household that's gripped by Eurovision fever at the moment, so we're all keeping these strange hours. And when I say we, I mean her. And my eyes were very red, and now they're very white. So that's pretty cool. Hey, if you're watching this, if it's just audio, that's my ears are the same color.
Yeah, I don't really know how to process anything you were just saying then. Only because you mentioned Eurovision and suddenly my eyes started glazing and my attention went elsewhere.
Oh, you can have some of my drops if you want. Have you been well?
Well, there's been a sickness that has plagued my household, Simon. I've got a little infant. She came home sick about, we'll say 2 and a bit weeks ago. A bit of a sniffle, a bit of a cough through the night, you know, all that kind of business.
Is it croup? It might be croup. The kids get croup all the time.
Yeah, probably. So anyway, she's like, been a bit sick, and then my wife got sick, and so she's been feeling it. So I think she got it from the little monster. And then, my mum was complaining she was feeling a bit unwell, and I think that my little daughter was the carrier there as well. And I was feeling pretty good about it all because I'd gone 2 weeks without a single sniffle since yesterday morning. Nothing but little sniffles coming from the old Dan Barry here.
That explains the hair as well. You've obviously been sneezing a lot. So, yeah, fair enough. Look, I know. I had a haircut. I got the eye drops in. I'm looking good. I'm feeling good about this. If you need me to look, for the first time in the history of our podcast, I'll look the healthy one.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've ever been accused of looking healthy in the past, but we'll go for it. Anyway, Simon, we can talk about your health and my health all day, and I know that's what the punters are after, but let's deny them by instead diving into a couple of reviews of TV shows and movies, because that's what we do on the podcast.
It stinks.
Simon, where are we kicking off this week? Because, look, there are some weeks where you just look at it and you say, there is an absolute avalanche of things to talk about this week. And then there's this week.
Sure. Yeah, this week sort of came up a bit short. I'll be looking at the new Ben Affleck film, which has just crept into cinemas. Roadshow are giving it no punch whatsoever. It's called Hypnotic. And I am also talking about Still, a new Michael J. Fox documentary on Apple TV, which I do have a few things to say about. It's an interesting film. Where are you looking at this week?
Look, this week this is a show that I was actually a bit excited about watching and probably less excited to talk about. It's a program called Muppets Mayhem, which is a new Muppet show from Disney Plus that goes deep on the Electric Mayhem, which is one of my all-time favorite aspects of the Muppets, hence my interest in the series.
The band.
But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll talk about the show as we get a bit further in. And also there's a brand new show from the creators of Gossip Girl. It's called City on Fire, and that's on Apple TV Plus. And we're going to kick the tires on that one and see if that's okay. But Simon, we are talking about Muppets on the show, so we've got a little intermission midway through. We're going to talk about our favorite Muppet characters in the worlds of film and television. So
I know, it's all Muppets. All Muppets, all day to day. Muppets, not just Muppets. They can be the puppet or the marionette. We're looking at how they've influenced film and TV and the famous ones from all these years of cinema.
Yeah. I guess the question as we dive into the reviews is, will Simon come out as a furry? Let's find out. But Simon, before we do that, how about we talk about Muppets and we'll dive into Muppets Mayhem.
The Mayhem? They taught Motley Crue how to shred and party. They tattooed their name on me when I was passed out. What? These guys go hard. I was in college the first time I saw the Mayhem play. I grew up idolizing Dr. Teeth. I bought gold grills just to be like him. Say cuckoo-cuckoo.
Well, we got a little sidetracked by the 80s.
For sure.
So as I said, this is a half-hour series that looks at the Electric Mayhem. So if you don't know the Electric Mayhem are the house band from the Muppets, because not everyone is necessarily as Muppet-orientated as you and myself are, Simon. I'm sure there's people listening going, yeah, I'm sure there's people saying, look, we know the Muppets, you know, we know the Electric Mayhem, you don't need to run us through this. But I'd say the majority of people have never really paid attention to the Electric Mayhem. When you see them, people are probably like, yeah, I know those characters. And they definitely know Animal on the drums. But Animal's a much larger character than just the Electric Mayhem.
For sure, yeah.
But yeah, if you start talking about characters like Janice or Dr. Teeth, like, people just don't know who these characters
or
are.
Lips. No, they don't know who they are. The Zoot Man. And I'm right in thinking they were initially introduced on the Muppet Show. They were the Muppet Show band. They weren't ex-Sesame Streeters or anything. They were created for the Muppet TV show.
Yeah, very much so. And obviously, and you can tell from the visual stylings of Janice that the her inspiration is Nico from the Velvet Underground. And so the band's supposed to be a bit of a piss take of Velvet Underground to a certain degree. So that's the the Muppeteers from the Muppets being a little bit hip and a bit sort of countercultural at the time. And that's kind of the thrust of what I wanted to talk about with this program. And I think that what I want to talk about this show isn't so much the show itself, but maybe we take a greater treatise as we think about what the Muppets have been doing on Disney for the last 10, 15 years. Because to me, this program, which is about the Electric Mayhem, is the absolute embodiment of what is wrong with the Muppets and the way that Disney have been handling it. So as I said, these characters originally came about as a satire of the Velvet Underground and of sort of, trippy, drugged up bands. Which is like, it very much comes from that sort of 70s era Muppets aesthetic. You think about what they were doing on the Muppet Show originally, and it was very... it's not necessarily the sort of references that you'd find in a modern-day Muppet Show. So the things that you probably remember best from the Muppet Show original one is things like the Mana Mana song. And like the Mana Mana song is basically a song that they heard on a Swedish porn movie, and they just thought it was a hilarious bit of music in the background. And so suddenly on the first or second episode of the Muppet Show, you've got these Muppets singing this Swedish porn movie theme song, which incidentally, if you ever track down the soundtracks to that film, absolute banger. Really quite good.
Those who have 7.5 minutes on their Swedish porn bingo card, take a drink.
It was going to come up.
Here we go.
So to speak. So, but this is the thing. This is what Jim Henson and co were doing back in the day. Like, they were kind of youngish men who were taking their influences from like the real sort of cutting edge progressive culture of the moment. But you cut to 2023, the characters are very much in the hands of Disney these days, and they're supposed to be wild and anarchic, but they're just not. Like, it's really playing it as safe as possible in every possible turn. Ultimately, what they really should be doing with the Muppets is thinking about them in the way that they kind of were in the 70s, which was kind of like, back in the 70s, it was kind of like the 70s era version of Adult Swim. Okay, you flip on Adult Swim these days, and like and Adult Swim's been around since the mid-90s at this point. Like, it's not like that's a young brand by any means, but it's still really subversive, really plays around in the absolute margins of culture. The Muppets should be doing that. Like, just freaking find some of these creators that you're hiring for Adult Swim and grab them and say, hey guys, play with the Muppets, mess around with them. We're going to be hands off. Let's see what you can do. They're going to do some very strange, very gross, disgusting things with the Muppets. But right now, they desperately need it because, frankly, I watch the Muppets and I don't really understand what I'm watching anymore. It's just, it doesn't feel pure organic anymore.
Let me just say, and I don't disagree with you. I think you make a valid point. I think that the Muppets came out of a very specific time and place. We remember that they were a prime time show, and they were a huge prime time show back in their day. Disney only sort of leapt onto the Muppets and saw it as a potentially very profitable property to relaunch because of the cultural impact they had. To your point about making them more adult swimmy, I think they tried to do that. One of the young Henson who's taken over Jim's operations, his son, whose name I can't remember at the moment, maybe Jim Henson Jr., I'm not sure.
Brian.
He tried to do that with that Brian, of course. He tried to do that with that terrible Melissa McCarthy movie, which was
called The Happy Land Murders.
The Happy Land Murders, which was my worst film of the year a few years back. And I know that they tried to sort of repackage the Muppets as the Muppet Show a few years ago on, I guess it would have been Disney, but it seemed like it was one of the linear networks. I can't remember who it was. But they've had trouble.
Simon, sorry, let a Muppetologist come in and sort of run you through this.
Sure.
Okay, so first of all, keep in mind that...
Well,
sorry, I was just going to say, keep in mind, Brian Henson, he wasn't playing with the Muppets. He was playing with just felt characters. And that's fine, go and do that sort of thing. But ultimately, I mean, Brian Henson's just not particularly that good. You can't just throw it at any young person. And Brian Henson is far from being a young person these days. He's suddenly, he's up there. My idea about adults kind of holds. But what you're thinking about was a show called The Muppets, which debuted on the ABC network in the US about 5 or 6 years ago. And it was taking its inspiration from The Office. And so Kermit would look at the camera like Jim from The Office and all that sort of thing. And it was just, it was probably the most ambitious that I think that Disney as a company have gotten in terms of doing anything with the Muppets license. But even so, it was still playing it way too safe, and none of the characters were particularly interesting.
Yeah.
And bringing it back to Muppets Mayhem so we can finish talking about this terrible program. Basically, the premise of this one is that Lily Singh, who is someone who was apparently a YouTube star that's got hired to be the host of what was the later program on NBC. That's the show that used to air at 1:30 a.m. And so when she took over, it stopped being a program that was recorded that week and they just filmed about 50 episodes back to back and just started rolling them out whenever. Right. Nobody watched it. The very limited cultural currency that later had just completely vanished. And Lily Singh, I don't think anyone's really worked out what to do with her because I don't know. I'm not that familiar with her. The most exposure I've really had to her is in this program, and I wouldn't say that she's necessarily one of the great talent finds. She's perfectly fine. No. I'm sure she's a lovely person, but just on screen, she's just failing line deliveries left, right, and center. The premise of this one is she's supposed to be a young woman working for a record company. The record company is not very good. It's definitely a company that's on its way out. She doesn't really understand that at all. And so after 6 years, so clearly she's stuck with this company for 6 years. So she's not a very bright, talented character anyway. But
that was
whatever, let's put that
extreme.
aside.
That was very odd. Yeah, I didn't get that at all.
But yeah, she's looking for a band that she can kind of take under her wing and prove her value to this company. And she realized that the Electric Mayhem are on the books. And then there's the one funny joke from the first episode where they have a news reporter talking about the band and say that they've been on tour for the last 30 or 40 years, whatever it's been, but have never gotten around to be bothered to record a record. And I thought that was very funny. Outside of that, nothing else in this episode worked for me. There's this really
the first episode
scene.
Was a real slog. Yeah. It was,
Yeah, I was going to say, there's just this labored scene where Lily Singh is told that anytime that Dr. Heath ends up seeing a hot tub, he has to take a hot tub. And so there's a sequence with Lily Singh out by this hot tub talking to him, and nothing about the scene pays off. It's basically just someone in the writer's room thought, oh, it'd be really funny if he was in a hot tub. And then they've really expanded the idea beyond that. And that's kind of, it speaks to what this entire program's doing. It's just sort of quirky ideas
and I thought it was
that
very
never
odd.
expanded upon.
I thought it was very odd that they would throw in some very strange sort of celeb cameos that I guess sort of harken back to what they used to do on the Muppet Show by bringing in celebrities. But I mean, nobody on the Disney who watches the Disney Network of any age is screaming out for a Billy Corrigan cameo or knowing who he is or some stupid Smashing Pumpkins joke. And while I think the second episode got a little bit better, it sort of found a gentler sort of narrative, more sentimental beat to it that had a few laughs. It's still very basic sort of sitcom-y storytelling that doesn't even, I guess sort of the nearest comparison might be something like The Partridge Family, where the band is sort of a bunch of kooks and the real world's trying to deal with them, but there wasn't a whole lot to it.
Two things to note there, Simon. First note, the Muppets aren't a sentimental bunch of characters. Like, that is completely counter to what the characters should be doing. So, no, sir, I do not want that in my program. The second thing is, his name isn't Billy Corrigan, it's Billy Corgan of the Smiling Pumpkins, Simon Foster smiling politely. What I think you probably need to keep in mind is that joke failed completely on screen because suddenly it becomes like an Oprah moment where Lily sings there going, oh, look, it's Billy Corgan from the Smashing Pumpkins. It is such a funnier joke if he's just the guy in the room and they don't actually acknowledge that he's Billy Corgan. Like, that would be hilarious. And I was watching it going, it's Billy Corgan. That's a really funny... Oh, wait, no, that's actually not funny now at all.
Exactly right. All right, so Disney Plus have botched the Muppets, the latest Muppets sort of project for them. Do they have a future? Where does it go from here?
Well, it just stays on Disney Plus. They own the Muppets out right now, so, you know, they'll just keep on putting out terrible Muppet project after terrible Muppet project.
It's inconceivable that they should be able to unravel all the goodwill that the entire global population feels towards the Muppets. What do they do with those beloved characters like Kermit and Miss Piggy and Gonzo and Fozzie Bear and it just bewilders me that they've stuffed this up so badly.
The thing is, it would be so easy just to be really cynical and say that the Muppets haven't been good since the death of Jim Henson back in, what was it, like 94, thereabouts. But like, real talk, they produced the Muppets Tonight program, which was the one that aired in the late 90s, like about 98, 99. And that version of the Muppets was basically a late night talk show in the vein of The Tonight Show or, you know, Letterman, because culturally that's kind of where everyone was paying their attention. And the show worked. Like, it was good. They introduced the Clifford character, who was the host of the program. He's the purple guy with the dreads that you start seeing in the background of a few of the Muppet films from that point in. That version of the Muppets is actually really, really funny. But that's the last time we've actually seen the Muppets really deliver on screen for what's been now, I guess, 23 years.
Yeah, it's true. We'll be talking more puppets and Muppets and marionette and stringed creatures, film and TV talk in our intermission, which we're calling No Strings Attached, the great puppet characters in film and TV. But that's a little way off. I've got some reviewing to do. I now understand that you went out today and saw Hypnotic, the new film starring Ben Affleck.
What do you see? Your daughter? The park?
Wasn't paying attention. Just for a second.
Work?
Think I'm ready for duty?
Do you feel ready?
I think it's the only thing keeping me sane. What's the call?
I'm calling to report a bank robbery.
Is this crime currently in progress?
Today.
See that guy on the bench?
Do you have a lighter?
That guy's up to something.
It's very hot today. It's like a furnace.
It's like a furnace.
So what we've really loved to talk about in weeks gone by is the disappearance of the mid-level programmer in cinemas. The movies that you could count on turning up in movie theatres just for a couple of weeks to fill 80 screens nationally, that people like Johnny Depp would do when they made films like Nick of Time, or that Nicolas Cage did with films like Kiss of Death. These sort of movies that never had high ambitions. They were good, solid B movies that stars were born and have been making since the dawn of Hollywood. And what you have in Hypnotic is that sort of movie. In the film, Ben Affleck plays a detective who is dealing with the tragedy of having a child abducted. His child abducted from a playground. And as we meet him, he's undergoing psychological treatment to help deal with that. He's called away from that psychologist's office to see out a tip on a bank heist. And in the middle of this bank heist, the very sinister William Fichtner appears. He should be in every movie because he's great. And what we learn is that he is Hypnotic, someone who can convince strangers to not accept their realities and do things at a whim for him, which doesn't really make sense because they do a whole lot of things that I'm sure Hypnotic couldn't sort of plant in their head. But we're not going to get into the depths of this storytelling because it is a bit naff. And from that point on, and I'm not going to spoil it, but it does start to take on an almost sci-fi type of element, a sci-fi thriller element involving government agencies and deep secrets and hypnotics that are beautiful, like Alice Braga, or who are just plainly sinister, like Jackie Earle Haley sitting in a chair with a shotgun. And the film is a good-looking film directed by Robert Rodriguez. It is coming into Australian cinemas day and date with the US. As I mentioned at the top of the show, Roadshow are just literally using this as filler product, which surprises me because it's got some talent and got some potential. But in the wake of, I guess, Guardians of the Galaxy soaking up all the screens and there being a limited number of cinemas this can go into, it's kind of just been shoved out there by the distributor, which is a shame because I think it's the sort of film that might work. Dan, I know you saw it today. Ben Affleck does a lot of eyebrow and forehead acting in this. He doesn't really call on his talents too much. He's really literally the movie star in this movie, doing the bare minimum that a movie star has to do. But in the end, I thought it was kind of cool.
Yeah, so look, this is a really hard film to talk about without getting a bit too spoilery. So
Exactly,
from the
yeah.
outset, looking at it, yeah, look, it feels very much like Rodriguez has decided to do some sort of like Inception, Christopher Nolan ripoff film.
Yep.
Okay, and like that's very much the entire vibe of the film. And I was watching it it was weird that you called it a good-looking movie because I was really thinking quite the opposite. I was thinking that a lot of the sets looked fairly chintzy, a lot of the like visual stylings just seemed a little bit off-kilter. But as you start delving a little bit deeper into this film, you actually begin to realize that a lot of those visual elements, which are just so off-putting for most of the film's runtime, is actually fairly deliberate. And as the film kind of leans into the gag of what they're really playing around with the film, as soon as it does that, like I sort of sat back and I thought this movie that was incredibly naff until that point, I was like, bravo, like this is really quite the accomplishment. And I would be very happy to watch this movie again because there's certainly elements of it that I'd like to pick up again and be able to play with it. It's certainly not a film where people are going to be leaving the cinema talking about this as like an all-time classic. I mean, think about Inception. You remember the big thing on that one culturally was everyone talking about the spinning top at the end. Like there's no sort of motif like that and nothing which is as clever cinematically to really sort of provide a hook for this film. But as one of those sort of generic programs you were talking about, like this absolutely sits on that same level as like a Nick of Time, which is a film that is beloved in the Dan Barrett's filmography of his mind. Yeah, like, I don't know. I really appreciated this movie by the end, but I will say that I found a lot of it to be a bit of a slog. Not quite Beau is Afraid a slog, an entirely different sort of kettle of fish. But, you know, still, I'm, like, if you're looking to feel like, it's not even a 2-hour film, it's like maybe 95 to 100 minutes. It's
92 minutes, I think it was, as I looked at it.
Yeah.
It also struck me as being very much a COVID film. There were lots of scenes. It's quite a small film in the scale of its storytelling. There's a lot of two shots and shots cutting back and forth to an actor that clearly suggests they weren't in the same room together. So I'm thinking that they kind of might have got away with shooting this over the COVID period in a smaller manner, in a smaller scale, which I guess sort of helped the film when the character beats have to be played out towards the end of the film, and you're meant to sort of feel something for these people. And I did feel something for Alice Braga. She's beautiful and she's very sort of potent in the sidekick girlfriend kind of role. I'm the same as you. This kind of won me over by the end, and as you say, it's not something that's going to live long in anybody's memory, but for a good 92 minutes on a rainy weekend afternoon, which apparently we're in for, this, you can do a lot worse than this.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, some really cool supporting cast members as well. Not mentioned by you is Jeff Fahey, who appears in a pretty prominent role right at the end of the film. It's good. Yeah. If you could do far worse than spending a bit of time in a cinema watching this one, I think.
I think you're right. All right, let's move on to the new Apple TV series, City on Fire.
He gets some rules to
There are no secrets in the city of New York. There's cameras everywhere, phone records, parking tickets. Someone saw something, heard something. The city always knows.
Sam got shot in Central Park.
Simon, City on Fire, which is based on a book by, I think it's the same name. It's about a university student. She's found shot in Central Park. There's a young black kid who has found the body. The police immediately assume that it's him because it's not particularly strong writing, and so they're trying to bring some sort of element of social awareness into the storytelling in the most ham-fisted of manners. So you got him as someone who gets involved in the story. There's a young man who is seeing a therapist, which I thought maybe there was going to be some sort of hypnotic crossover, but doesn't really play out that well. It's just, standard psychological, concerns that needs to be dealt with in a medical fashion. He's a young guy. He's like your standard stereotypical Peter Parker type. In fact, the young guy that plays him, Wyatt Olaf, if they were looking for a replacement Peter Parker, just slide him on in there. He'll be just fine. You've got him, the girl who's found in a park. As we start seeing in the flashbacks of all the events that led up to this and a couple of months leading into it, she's kind of a standard sort of manic pixie dream girl of sorts, and it just feels like it's been so heavily done before. There's some other characters, and all of them seem fairly disparate. You don't really understand how they're connected. Obviously, by the end of the first episode, you start seeing a bigger, canvas that's being sort of played with here, with the Manic Pixie Dream Girl as the central sort of character. But within the larger scope of things, you do have some fairly fun actors in there. So people like Jemima Kirk, who people would remember from Girls. She's in there, and she's always incredibly magnetic to watch on screen. Ashley Zuckerman, the Australian actor, I think he's just incredibly compelling in anything that he's in. The two of them play husband and wife, and it's a relationship that's not really quite working because his character was sleeping with a certain protagonist in a TV show that was found lying in a state of being heavily shot at the beginning of the episode. So all these characters are living their lives, but they're all largely connected through her. There's these fires that have been set by some friends of hers around the city in the time leading up to it. And so the murder mystery, well, it's not a murder mystery, but the shooting mystery is really related around the idea of who shot her and how are these people sort of connected. It comes from Josh Schwartz and Stephanie Savage. The two of them are best known for working on Gossip Girl, the most recent reboot. They've worked together on a bunch of other TV programs, and none of them have really gelled. The Dynasty reboot, I think, sort of came from their stable as well. They're just kind of very workman-like, generic, sort of youth-orientated TV creators. I feel that if I was 19 years old and I hadn't really seen a lot of this stuff yet, I'd probably be quite a bit more into this program than I was. But if you've seen television before, maybe just go and watch the Electric Mayhem TV show on Disney+.
Okay, all of which, yes, I wasn't terribly enthused by the first episode of this. The one aspect that I did find it interesting is that it's set in 2003, and that the shadow of 9/11 still hangs very heavily over the show, and the guilt and the fear and the sense of grief that certainly the main character, Wyatt Olaf's character Charlie, is feeling. And while the manic Pixie Dream Girl stereotype is certainly there in Chase Suey Wonders as Samantha, that is very much of its time, and it is very much countered to the grief that the city is in after 9/11. So I don't know how much more that plays into the show after episode 1. I've only watched that first episode, as I said, but it's I thought that made it just that slightly more interesting to watch than just another sort of New York teen thing from the Gossip Girl stables. So, but yeah, you're right. It's not, so far it doesn't seem very important or to be playing very cleverly with those elements.
I actually found myself interrogating my reactions to that 9/11 elements of the program, only because, one, I didn't actually find it made it that much more interesting to me. It just kind of seemed as though I was supposed to find greater gravitas to the program because it has those elements, rather than actually feeling as though I have that connection. And where I started interrogating my relationship to that was that obviously we're not American, and so the 9/11 tragedy has a different resonance for us, and maybe it doesn't really resonate with us in the same way that it may with a US viewer. So I certainly appreciate that. For some viewers, they may find a greater connection to this than I did. So I do have that. But I also wonder with like 9/11 reaction dramas, in a world where I kind of feel as though we've been through this massive pandemic in the last couple of years, from a US perspective, you've also got the trauma for many people of living through a Trump presidency. And I kind of just wonder if there's just been so much stuff happening, like so much weighty, just global concern over the last 5, 6, 7 years, that September 11 just doesn't resonate at all in the way that it used to, because it just kind of feels like the world's been forced to move on in just different ways.
See, that's interesting, because I still think of 9/11 quite a bit, and I walked the World Trade Centers, and I'm immediately sensitive to anything that hints at that period in time. Like, it was the first thing I latched onto when I saw this was a 2003 set New York City story. So I think it still has a profound effect on how I watch films that purport to be, or TV shows that purport to be about that period. So it's interesting. I don't for me, I'm almost the opposite. Nothing that's come in the wake of 9/11 has the scale of sort of human tragedy and suffering that 9/11 did, despite an America that's now such a dim, dark, fully revealed shadow of what it once was, and or how it was once perceived anyway. So that's interesting.
You know, COVID killed a lot of people, right?
I know of COVID. I read at some website somewhere, but I don't recall it in any.
Right.
But I don't think it had I don't think it had the human scope. We're not going to compare tragedies here, I guess you could say. But it's I just remember being of a time and being very connected to New York City because of my travels there, and being completely sort of shaken by what happened on 9/11. So it's just an impact that has whenever I watch narratives about that time.
Simon, we're scrapping our intermission. Instead, we're doing 5 favorite tragedies. Go.
Well, don't get me started on the Titanic. I mean, really. Anyway, let's move on. Speaking of tragedies, and this isn't such a tragic film, it's actually a beautifully told story. I'm about to review a movie called Still, a Michael J. Fox movie, which is on Apple TV.
The story of me. Take 2.
3, 2, here we go. Ready and action.
Wait a minute, Doc. Are you telling me that you built a time machine out of a DeLorean?
What did it mean to be still?
I wouldn't know. I was never still.
That's him. That's our star.
I want this job. I can do it. Whatever the exception is, I can fix it. I can be older. I can be taller. I can be anything.
Still, a Michael J. Fox movie is very much what you see is what you get. It's Michael J. Fox speaking directly to director Davis Guggenheim's camera about initially his career, his emergence from the suburbs of Canada, the determination he had as a very small kid who became a very small teenager to make it in the world of acting. Then having become the huge TV and movie star that he became in the 80s, what a dick he became, and they're his words, not mine. He was quite objectionable to those all around him. In fact, it was his wife, Tracy Pollan, who first said to him, "Hey, you're being a dick, stop it." And no one had ever spoken to him that way, and that's why he fell in love with her straight away and remains to this day to be in love with her, which is beautifully portrayed in this film. And then, of course, the moment when he woke up with a terrible hangover after a night on the booze in Florida with Woody Harrelson, and his little finger is twitching terribly. And he starts to realize that there may be something wrong that he can't explain, and the diagnosis that came from that for his Parkinson's disease. And if you think you've heard or followed a lot of Michael J. Fox's narrative over the last 20 years as how with regards to how he's dealt with how bad that disease has gotten for him, this film takes another more intimate step towards an insight into his personal life, the pain he's feeling, how his family's dealt with it, how he runs the foundation that this movie is generally in service of, but also in creating I guess a more sort of open discussion on the disease and how it's affected this man. It's a really beautiful film and a really touching story that's cut together in a way that highlights how his films and his TV characters have been an extension of him and how they continue to play an important role in why we love him so much and why we're able to sort of go along with him on this journey as he deteriorates. So it's it's a really powerful film. It's a beautiful piece of filmmaking. It's on Apple TV.
Yeah, look, Michael J. Fox has been a fixture in my life since I was a kid. I grew up with Family Ties being a beloved show in my household. The Back to the Future movies, obviously. Some of his great cinematic works like The Hard Way. Okay, maybe not so much that one, but quite a number of his films were Concierge, which I believe was called For Love
Life
or
with
Money
Mikey
in the US. I can't say I can speak to Life with Mikey. Secret of My Success. I actually do quite like The Hard Way. I shouldn't really crap on it too much. You know, there's a bunch of movies he made that, I'm really quite a fan of. And then sort of later work, he's obviously been a recurring actor on quite a lot of episodes of The Good Wife and Good Fight, particularly increasingly sort of fewer appearances through The Good Fight than you ever saw him on The Good Wife. He was surprisingly on that show a lot. But you could see like that decline in his health happening sort of season by season on that show. As someone who just did a rewatch of The Good Wife.
Well, he speaks at length.
Well, I should point out
that he's...
So go.
Yeah, he speaks at length about how for the first time in his career he was able to embrace and act on screen with his Parkinson's out there, and why that role in that show was so important to him. And he shows how they managed to get around his left arm tremors through the shooting of the Spin City series, and how he always was holding something or had his hand in his pocket or was always carrying a pen or a clipboard or something. So it was extraordinary to watch how the industry helped him cope with it and what he did to cope with it on screen.
Yeah, I think ultimately what I was going to get to is that having watched his decline on screen as an actor, like just, such a lengthy time period, so 10 years that you could really see him on screen actively with Parkinson's, I'm not sure I can watch this documentary. Like, it just feels too painful to watch him go through this. And I appreciate that, I'm just some guy watching it at home. Like, I'm not actually living with this. I don't have any friends or family that are dealing with this as far as I'm aware. So, like, me saying, I could never watch this, like, that's kind of, what does it matter? Like, really, who cares? But I just don't think I can sit through and watch the program. It's just genuinely too upsetting for someone who's been such a frequent and regular part of my pop cultural consumption through my entire life.
Sure. Yeah, and he puts that in perspective too. He says that this might be too sad or too tragic for some, but it also puts a perspective for those who are suffering with it on how he deals with it, and the self-deprecation and the frankness with which he just openly discusses it is it doesn't make it any easier to watch, but it does give you an understanding of how brave he's been in the manner in which he's dealt with it.
Look, 100%.
All right, that gets us to the end of the review segment. I think it's time for intermission. Yeah, look, it's all things Muppets. We've had a big talk about the Muppets at the top of the show and how much everyone hates them now. So let's go into an intermission called No Strings Attached. The great puppet characters in film or TV. Sure, the Muppets have dominated the hand-controlled character landscape for 50-odd years, maybe longer than that. But they're not the only glove and or string stars of film and television, so I thought we'd take a trip back in time to celebrate those actors made of felt, foam and ping-pong balls. And I've prepared a long list because I knew you wouldn't do any research for this. So if you go to your shared folder there in our Google Drive, you will see something which I call puppet characters. And there's 2 pages of puppet characters there. So take your pick, my friend. Where do you want to kick things off? I've got a few that I can scream out. Australia has had a rich history of puppet characters on screen. Of course, the beloved Aussie Ostrich on the Hey Hey It's Saturday. While everything was collapsing in madness around him, he was able to often just drop in and we're talking about the great Ernie Carroll when we talk about Aussie Ostrich, the late great Ernie Carroll. He had a comic timing with Daryl Summers, which was quite special and honed over many, many years. So I'm not surprised he became a household name. I guess the other one you'd throw in there is Agro, who was very famous. And for us kids of a certain generation, Mr. Squiggle and Blackboard were hugely popular. But do go on.
Look, okay, so if we're thinking about Australian, there were a couple of what I thought were just really notable omissions from your list here, Simon. So you do mention Shell's Neighbourhood. I think that it's important to refer to the show that came after Shell's Neighbourhood, which was the Early Bird show, where the main character in that one was one Marty Monster, who I just think is one of the most hilarious characters ever. If you want to see like one of the ultimate all-time great Australian clips, get onto the YouTube, type in Marty Monster and Kangaroo, and boy, are you going to be up for a good sort of 10 minutes.
I do know that clip. It is hilarious. The kangaroo gets... well, I think it starts off aggressive and then gets frisky, so I don't know, but it looks fun.
Aggressively frisky. Look, a couple of other characters Australia-wise that sort of jumped to mind. Winky Dink, he introduced a lot of cartoons for me on that program that used to be on in the afternoons on Channel 9 that I've forgotten the name of all of a sudden.
Yeah.
But Winky Dink particularly notable for if you went to an Australian Wendy's, different to the American Wendy's chain, because in Australia it's just an ice cream chain. They had the Winky Dink ice cream for many, many, many years after that show stopped being even remembered by the most ardent of TV fans. And then the other Australian puppet-orientated show that I think is worth mentioning is there was I think it's only like maybe about 20 episodes all up, but on the ABC they produced a live-action Blinky Bill TV program. Okay, which it's a little bit hard sort of speaking enthusiastically about it because the Ranger was one Robert Hughes, who we all know went on to a few sort of Hey Dad related issues in the 20 years that followed. But it was a very prominent show for me as a young man.
Yeah. Now, listen, this raises an interesting point. I wanted to get to this before we listed a few more great puppet characters. I got into quite the debate with myself about including Humphrey B. Bear in this. Now, for overseas listeners, and I know we've got many, the Humphrey B. Bear was a big, imagine Winnie the Pooh, but 6 foot tall and wearing a vest, no pants. Now, is he a puppet? And I also quote the example of Big Bird in this. Now, Big Bird is a puppet because the man reaches up, the late great Carol Spinney reaches up and works his mouth. And those watching on YouTube or Spotify will see me doing the mouth movements here to explain what a puppeteer does. So Big Bird is, but would you put, say, Fat Cat in there? Because I don't think he ever did any talking. And Humphrey had the mouth but didn't have the words. So it's this grey area in the world of puppeteers on television I think we have to be careful of.
Yeah, look, I'm actually not too sure. And I mentioned Marty Monster, who, again, is very much in this sort of vein of just man in suit. I'm honestly not sure. I would be inclined to say that, no, they're not puppets. They're just people in costumes. But also, I'm willing to hear the argument. I mean, I think maybe the more interesting question with Humphrey B. Bear, Simon, isn't so much is he a puppet or not, but is he a member of some sort of a stolen generation? Because you regularly see photos in Humphrey's house of his bear family, of whom he's no longer permitted to live with. Instead, he seems to have been ripped away from that sort of family unit and is instead forced to live with humans and engage in like their bullshit that they're engaging on whatever episode of the program. So, I don't know, it just raises questions that I'm not comfortable talking through.
I just remembered Marty and Emu from the early days of Channel 7. He went off to a big career in the UK. So there's Marty and Emu. There's another one. Okay, I want to mention very quickly. Now, we've got the Jim Henson creations. We've mentioned the Muppets. Then you've got the movies like The Dark Crystal and Labyrinth, TV shows like Fraggle Rock and Sesame Street, and of course, the characters of Yoda in the Star Wars film and the whole cast of Return of the Jedi, or as I like to call it, the Star Wars Muppet movie. So Jim Henson and Jim Henson's offshoots have played a huge role, obviously, in puppets on screen. So with that out of the way, there's a couple of others I want to mention, and I've got a big list here. In the movie...
Sorry, mate, Simon, sorry, wait.
What are you whining about?
Sorry, if we're going to talk... if we're just going to blow past the Henson creations, okay, I think there's two things that needs to be noted. You've got here the cast of Return of the Jedi. Okay, so why you haven't also got the cast of, there was puppeteering taking place in Empire Strikes Back. Not sure why you haven't listed that, but let's not focus on it too much. Why are you not drilling down a little bit further with some of the great Return of the Jedi Muppet characters that populate that program? No reference at all to Salacious Crumb. No reference at all to the Max Rebo band. What are you doing, Simon?
Yeah. Well, look, I'm not a huge fan of Return of the Jedi, whereas I might have watched the other Star Wars films, or certainly episodes, A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, too many times to count. I've probably seen Return of the Jedi 4 or 5 times. It's not my favorite Star Wars movie by a long way. But having said that, you're absolutely right. It's my faux pas that the Henson creations that George Lucas drew upon to populate his alien landscapes in Return of the Jedi were brilliant and landmark sort of creations. So bravo. We acknowledge that Jim Henson and the Jim Henson Workshop.
Justice for Salacious Crumb.
Exactly, justice for Salacious Crumb. A couple of movie characters I want to mention very quickly. Audrey, which I also think was a Jim Henson creation in The Little Shop of Horrors, the giant singing, eating plant, which I just fell in love with. I think Little Shop of Horrors is a brilliant work. You've got Peter Jackson's Meet the Feebles, which was a very adult, very saucy use of puppets. There is a film called The Adventures of Prince Ahmed. You can actually see it on YouTube. It's a 1926 film from Lotte Reniger, and it uses the Thai puppetry, the shadow puppetry, where they use the puppets on sticks and move them against a cloth board with light behind it and create these amazing shadow puppets. It is a beautiful film and has been remastered if you can get a look at that one. And then you can just start rattling off things like the Team America World Police movie, which certainly changed the way we watched puppets on screen, and the chestburster in Alien, which was a puppet. So puppetry has been used for many unusual moments on screen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess maybe just the one thing I'd sort of want to sort of throw out there is it's one thing to talk about the Jim Henson creations and whatnot, but if we're talking about puppets on TV particularly, I mentioned, doing the segment without referencing Sid and Marty Krofft, I think is, doing a massive disservice. Yeah. So they're responsible for characters like the Banana Splits, HR Puff and Stuff, and also every other sort of LSD related puppet you may have seen through the 70s and 80s. Yeah. For sure. There was one, and I've literally just been trying to like Google it really, really quickly, and I just can't seem to find it. There was a live action program, which I believe was a wraparound for the Harlem Globetrotters cartoon. No, sorry, it was a Three Stooges cartoon from the late 70s. And it was them as like robotic Stooges. Yeah, I'm trying to find the name of the thing. In fact, if I just type into Google Robot Stooges, that will probably give me the show that I'm looking for.
Robot Stooges. Do you know the Stooges?
Robot Stooges. Let's. I will show you the Stooges.
I'll rattle off a couple of other.
Okay, so the robotic Stooges.
We'll show you the Stooges.
The Robotic Stooges was the name of the program, apparently.
Okay.
But yeah, I feel that after a season of this, I feel it got roped into, here's the program, the Skatebirds. And the Skatebirds was a program in 1977 that was cancelled just a few months later. But it must have played here on TV like quite a fair bit, because I got a very strong memory of this from being a kid. And it was basically people in large bird costumes who were on roller skates chasing each other around in like sped up sort of motion around a very large set.
I love it.
It's haunted me for so much of my life. Yeah.
Clearly it has. Lately we've had a resurgence in puppet characters with Grogu on the Mandalorian, clearly a puppet, but a very cleverly put together one. From my youth, I remember Bill and Ben the Flower Pot Men. I remember Andy Pandy. Lamb Chop was one of my favorite on-screen characters. And then we had this run of kind of adult-oriented primetime puppet shows. Alf was a puppet and dinosaurs were a puppet, but we also had things like Greg the Bunny. We had Triumph, the insult comic dog, who was terrific on the Conan show and very funny. And we had Franklin Delano Bluth, who was Job's African-American puppet from Arrested Development, which I remember faintly but hilariously. So TV has been a rich ground for some great puppet characters.
So look, we just touched upon one of my real issues with the ATV program. So you mentioned a program called ALF. Let me talk to you about the problem with ALF.
Here we go.
So this family, an everyday American family, the Tanners, okay, they find an alien life form has crash landed. Father, the parental figure, Willie Tanner, ends up bringing the alien life form into their house, and they call him Alf, because how could they call him an alien life form all the time? But the thing is, he's a character that speaks the English that we all speak, the English that the Tanner family speak in America. He speaks. He tells them all his name is Gordon Shumway, but they keep on calling him Alf. Like, how offensive is that? He's from another planet. How about we be good ambassadors and actually respect him, as opposed to locking him in a house, preventing him from eating cats? Give him some cats to eat. Call him Gordon Shumway. That's all that we really need to do to really appease like this alien creature. Also, ending Alf's story with Project Alf. Come on. The character deserves so much better than what we've offered him.
Wow. Okay. That's a tough call. I love Project Alf, the standalone film. We would get emails from people at screenwatchingpodcast@gmail.com. If we didn't mention Thunderbirds, of course, the great Basil Brush, and maybe even the classic sort of cartoon characters. We can't forget that characters like Howdy Doody and Charlie McCarthy were landmark and huge television stars back in their day. So I think we've pretty much done it with Muppets, haven't we?
Look, we have. I do like on your list you've included Clarence from Wondershausen. First of all, if people listening to this or watching it on YouTube and Spotify, if you haven't ever seen Wondershausen, get on YouTube and just type in Wondershausen. It is probably the most amazing TV program I've ever seen in my life. Like, it is... Every single second of that delivers so many laughs that have me holding my stomach laughing. It is the funniest thing I've ever seen in my life. Incredible program, but probably the standout on that is this puppet on it called Clarence, who does Man on the Street segments where he just goes and harasses people on the streets. My God, Simon. My God. He's incredible. Maybe television's greatest puppet.
I think that's a great idea. Go to YouTube and check it out. All right, that is the intermission section. If you have a favourite puppet or a puppet that we've missed out, and we've missed a few, I did a big list. Did I do any more here below the line? Oh, there's a couple there. Do send us an email at screenwatchingpodcast@gmail.com.
Okay, Simon, what else have you been watching is probably the big question on my mind right now.
Well, you've had a trip to the movies today. You had a very productive day today. What have you been watching?
Look, I mean, I did have a productive day. I was telling you about this earlier, but I had the day off work. So today I took care of a bit of business that I needed to take care of first thing in the morning. But then I went and saw Hypnotic. I went and had a tasty little lunch straight afterwards. And then I went straight into go and watch November, which is a action thriller from France, which takes a look at the real-life police investigations into the terrorist activity that took place in 2015. People may remember that one as there were, I think it was 3 different terrorist events that took place as part of the same terrorist operation. But the most notable one being a shooting at a Eagles of Death Metal show, which took place in a nightclub venue, during the nighttime. So there was a football stadium shooting, there was another incident, and then there was this nightclub moment. I suspect this is one of these things where if I was watching this in France, it would probably resonate so much more with me because I'm sure there's still a lot of trauma related to that incident having taken place. For me, watching it, I found technically it's really interesting. It's very engaging and gripping, but it seems to just lack a little bit of like cinema magic in there. Like I just couldn't really find like an into really just like sometimes movies just have that sort of magical quality which just sort of draw you in, and I wasn't not drawn in, but I just also didn't connect in the same way I kind of wish I had. So technically it's very good, but it's just kind of, it is what it is.
Called November, in limited release.
Mileage will vary. Yeah.
Jean Dujardin, he's the lead character, isn't it? Mr. Jean-Paul Dujardin. What's his name? I can't remember his name, but he was very good in The Artist.
Yeah, the bloke from The Artist.
The bloke from The Artist. Now, another film is in limited release around Australia at the moment. It's called Infinity Pool. This is from the young Cronenberg, Brandon. So you know you're going to get something a little bit weird and a little bit kooky, and it is that. It's the story of a man who goes to a resort, follows this very odd couple, and finds himself caught up in a, without giving too much away, a cloning operation where the wealthy get to clone themselves, commit any sort of horrible act, and then it is their clones which are punished by death, and they actually get to watch themselves being killed. And it unfolds in a manner that's kind of body horror-y, and sort of wants to pose a few questions about, do the wealthy get away with whatever they want? Is there any price to pay for that? A theme that was handled much better in Triangle of Sadness, I thought. And it does have some very icky moments, as you'd expect from somebody from the Cronenberg gene pool. But I think it's sort of, while it's Brandenburg's most, I guess, accomplished and polished production, I don't think it's as clever as I think it is, and I don't think it's as good as Possessor, which was the last film that really saw him burst onto the screen. Now, you saw it a few weeks back, gave it a middling 2.5 on your Letterboxd account. Well, does that sort of sum up your feelings for it?
Look, I mean, pretty much. So the one thing I'd say is that as the film kind of gives away its gimmick, which is that it's actually a cloning operation, I found that bit was just really awkwardly handled. So it's become sort of apparent a few minutes in that that's what's going on, but in the moment where that's revealed to the main character who discovers that he's actually been cloned, it just kind of feels as though it's just not really communicated with the audience anywhere near as clear as it needs to be to take you through that moment. And a lot of the back end of this movie, and when I say the back end of the movie, it's really about 2/3 of the movie, as it just starts getting more and more confused. So I kind of feel that it needed like this real clarity to say, hey, this is what's going on, because the rest of the film gets so batshit crazy that I think that they just needed to not confuse the audience so that they could actually confuse the audience properly as it goes in.
Yeah.
So the conceit of this one is that this guy has inadvertently killed someone, like he was drunk driving, ran over somebody. And do we know which country it was? Sorry, it's been a little while since I've seen it now.
It was a made-up country. It was a fake,
country.
Pretend country. Yeah.
So in this made-up country, basically for wealthy patrons, they can offer them the opportunity to avoid going to prison, and instead what they'll do is clone an entirely new body, and they'll murder the clone, okay, as like a death sentence instead of, killing the main person. So the family of a person who's been murdered has the ability then to go and kill the person who's responsible for murdering their family member. And then that's basically government's like, okay, we'll take the money for the cloning operation and get on with it. I mean, as a conceit, like, sure, I don't really quite buy it, but it's fine. It's too fantastical, really, to buy into too much. And I
not
get
clever enough as a satire
for that reason.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know, and sorry, we should just say, so he falls in with a group of wealthy people who every year they just come and commit all sorts of terrible atrocities because they know they can just buy them way out of it. And so they lose more and more of their humanity as they go further down the path of being cloned repeatedly. I don't know. It's interesting enough. I kind of like the performances in it. I like the brazen lack of humanity on display. It's kind of fun. Bit of wish fulfillment, maybe. I don't know. I want us to like it more than I did.
It shows a few cracks in him as a storyteller and a director that it's not quite as impactful as it should be. And I sort of felt he was straining to get across the most clever elements of this and coming up just short. But anyway, it's called Infinity Pool. It's in limited release around the country. Hey, we got an email through the week. Our first email at screenwatchingpodcast@gmail.com by our good friend Geordie Cowan. And he writes, and I think this is in response to your Silo review. Geordie says, "Hi guys, love your work. Just a quick note to say that Silo which is the big-budget Apple TV science fiction series starring Rebecca Ferguson and a whole bunch of good people, definitely deserves the series treatment a movie would butcher the concepts that are explored in the books, which are excellent. You also would not get the caliber or actors and production if it was a movie, in my opinion. I don't agree with that, but anyway. However, I do also feel that as a show, it would benefit from watching it in chunks rather than one episode weekly, so maybe come back to it in a few weeks and give it another go. It's got a question mark there. I haven't watched it yet. Does that sway your opinion on it? Thanks, Geordie, for writing into us.
So what I will say is that I think I reviewed it after watching 3 episodes. I can't remember exactly, but I've actually watched the good bulk of the season now because just quietly I've got a screener site where I can just kind of burn through it all and watch the whole season. Apple's very good that way to critics. I don't know. I have to say, with every episode I watch, I'm finding myself less and less interested in it and more convinced that I kind of just wish it was a movie. And look, I totally buy into what he's talking about with the idea that this is a series of books. Maybe I'd prefer this if it was a series of TV movies, and maybe it's just a movie aligning with each of the books. Maybe that would be a bit better for me, but I don't know. I just found myself just disassociating further and further from this the more I struggled to watch episode after episode.
Yeah, well, Mr. Sci-Fi, he still hasn't seen it, so I'll check it out through the week. And yes, the Apple site for us critics is very good. Okay, let's get on to this day in history. Got some good ones for you tonight, Dan Barrett. Wait till I get to the birthday quiz. It may be my masterpiece. May 12, 1975, Network 9, or the 9 Network, premieres a local version of Johnny Carson's Tonight Show hosted by which American-born entertainer?
Well, look, I mean, this could really only be one person, being Don Lane. So, the question is which American-born entertainer, so Don Lane.
It is Don Lane. Well done. May 12, 2005, which hit Aussie sitcom premieres on BBC Two on its way to a Brit TV award for International Series nomination? That was terribly written, Simon, but you know what I'm trying to say.
I mean, I'm not, but I picked out some key words in it, which was Aussie sitcom and 2005. I was trying to work out what would have been big enough to translate around that time, and I'm going to assume that it's Kath and Kim.
I'm pretty sure the answer is Kath and Kim, except I've written Frontline here, and I don't think it is Frontline. I'm almost certain that it is Kath and Kim, so I may have got my answers wrong. But Don Lane's there, so maybe I just got that one wrong. Okay, apologies for that. It's late on a Friday night, although I did this at like 10 o'clock in the morning, but that's no excuse. Okay, let's go to the next question. May 14, 1998, the final episode of Seinfeld, which you've just watched in full, is seen by how many US television viewers?
Okay, so it's been some time now since...
Yeah, and I'll give you this to the nearest 5.
Okay, well, look, I certainly know it was in the 70 million mark, and I was going to say 75 million.
Ooh. Wow, 76.3. Well done, my friend. Yeah. And the last question is May 17, 1970, which 2 items fetch $15,000 or $113,000 in 2023 dollars at an MGM Studios auction and are donated straight to the Smithsonian Institute? May 17, 1970.
Okay, so I think the key words in this one, and we'll see if my thinking plays out in this one, the key words are MGM and which 2 items... And so I'm thinking it's the ruby slippers from The Wizard of Oz.
Dan Barrett, you do know your movies. Well done, sir. Yes, it was the ruby slippers from The Wizard of Oz. Well done, my friend. All right, play the birthday cue.
4 for 4.
No, not happy birthday. No, not that. Please, no, not happy birthday.
We're back with the birthdays. Now, I got very excited because this week had absolutely no one of real interest as a birthday in the week coming up. And I say that with all due respect, but I couldn't match up. There was Kate Blanchett, but I couldn't match her to anyone in there. There was Cher and there's nothing going on. But I did fall on these 4. May 16, 1905, the legend who is Henry Fonda. May 16, 1955, one of those beautiful women ever to step before a camera, Deborah Winger. May 17, 1962, funny man and late night host Craig Ferguson. And May 18, 1970, the great Tina Fey. Now, they are all connected in some way. And I've put this out to people through the week and they've ummed and ahed about it and they've had some pretty wild guesses and they haven't got it. Dan Barrett, can you crack the quiz?
So you sent me a text with this earlier in the week, and I've spent all week trying to work out what the connection is, and I cannot place it. And I was going down pathways of have they all worked with Steve Martin at some points, and that's not the case. I think Deborah Winger's worked with him, and Tina Fey obviously has, but couldn't find connections for Ferguson or Henry Fonda. And that's such a weird group of people that I just can't find any crossover.
Yes, they are.
I thought maybe they were all Jewish for a while, but Henry Fonda as a Jewish man seemed a bit unlikely. But I went down that route, and certainly nothing played out. The only thing I'm going to throw, and this is just something that literally came to mind right then, is, and I can only literally connect this to one of them, but maybe there's filmography items that play out otherwise, is that they've all worked on screen with a robot.
Wow. You know what? After a whole week of going back and forth on this, you're actually pretty close. And let me just tell you very briefly, when you put Muppets Mayhem into the review slot, I thought I'm onto something here. And then when you agreed to the puppet middle bit, I thought this is going to be a great segment. We get to the birthday. It's as simple as they've all appeared on Sesame Street. They've all done episodes of Sesame Street.
Henry Fonda was on Sesame Street.
You know what? The one clue I've given out through the week is what is the one bit of entertainment, maybe not the one bit, but what's a good guess for the one bit of entertainment that's spread over 60, 70 odd years of television? And the clue on the Facebook page is Small Screen Connection. Henry Fonda was on a 1978 Sesame Street Christmas special. He played himself. Deborah Winger appeared in episode 2934 of Sesame Street. And she counted to number 41 with The Count. Craig Ferguson was in season 42 of Sesame Street, and he demonstrates the word experiment with Elmo. And Tina Fey was on episode 4626 with Pharrell Williams, and she was featured in the now famous Buccaneers sketch. So there you go, everyone. You're welcome. One of my great birthday quizzes ever. They've all been on Sesame Street.
Okay.
See how we came full circle then? It was very clever.
Yeah, look, I mean, you should be very impressed with yourself, and I know that you are.
I really am.
So, Simon,
I
think it's time to sign off so you can go and luxuriate in your smugness.
I've got to get another birthday quiz up. I'm gung-ho for birthday quizzes now. It's quickly become the highlight of my week.
Jeez, what a sad state of affairs this has devolved into. Look, folks, thank you very much for listening to Screen Watching. My name is Dan Barrett. You can find me on Twitter, inexplicably, at the Dan Barrett. Still not on Blue Sky. Start your day with my free newsletter. It's called Always Be Watching. Find that one at alwaysbewatching.com. It's got the big stories in TV, streaming, and film. And on Friday, we've got the Always Be Streaming newsletter, which recounts the big shows that launched that very week. And it is 9:43 on Friday night, which means I've still got another 2.5 hours to get out this edition of the Always Be Streaming newsletter.
Good luck with that. Okay, you read my words at screen-space.net. It's a good website. The Facebook page is at Screen Watching Podcast. Go to Twitter at Screen_Watching. The Screen Watching YouTube channel, just this afternoon, I put up my interview with director Ivan Sen about his new film, the Outback Noir thriller Limbo, which is in cinemas next week with Simon Baker. Terrific film. And you can email us, as I've mentioned, at screenwatchingpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you, Geordie, for writing to us. Look forward to all your feedback, questions and comments on that email site.
So I should check out the new Ivan Sen?
Yes, I have. It's really very good. I watched it before I interviewed him. He's a tough interview. He can be a little bit droll, a little bit quiet at times, but he had lots to say in this interview and really spoke about cinema in great length. So I was very lucky to chat with him. And Limbo is his best work.
Yeah, I did a live Q&A with him once, and I kind of feel that he hated me, but, we'll see.
I know. I sort of set that up for you because I couldn't get anyone else to do it. But so I do appreciate that.
Good times. Anyway, folks, this has been Screen Watching. We'll be back next week. Will that bit make it as the final edit? Yeah, probably. Folks, we'll see you next week.
Probably will.